The resilience and the bravery of the Filipinos, that was a strength of ours. It was just bravery everywhere. And you're seeing things from boys, unbelievable things, well beyond their ability. That's why we're ranked 42 or 41 or 40 in the world with very little budget, mate. It wasn't letting themselves down. It was letting the nation down. It was letting their families down. So they would performance for families. It was selfless. It wasn't about themselves. So I'm really a director of coaching because I think it's really important that I coach the coaches, and it's easy just to filter down from the coaches. When you've got everything right, when you're actually sitting in a banana lounge because everything's just humming because they're doing it all themselves. I think the icing on the cake of success is culture and getting that right.
Welcome to Coaching Culture, the podcast about cultivating culture and leadership. I'm Ben Herring. I've been loving this side of the game for bloody ages. Today's guest is Stuart Woodhouse, and he has been the head coach of the Philippine national team for 10 years, the Volcanoes as they are known, created in 2006 and got their first world ranking in 2012, which was 71st in the world. In 2024, at the back end of Stu's campaign, they got their highest ranking of 40th in the world. Before this, Stu was a first grade coach in Australia, Eastwood and West Harbour, and by day, he is Director of Coaching at the prestigious rugby school of Kings in Sydney. Stu Woodhouse, welcome to the Coaching Culture podcast.
Thanks, Ben. Mate, love your podcast. Addicted to it. I've got many coaching friends who listen to it as well. So you are very popular out there, mate. And I think it's refreshing in terms of this podcast. You know, great guests and that real, the real. I think the icing on the cake of success is culture and getting that right. And so I'm learning every time I listen to a podcast. I've written copious amounts of notes from each of your guests and just love their stories. It's been brilliant, mate.
Righto, mate. Well, I'll give you the little brown envelope of cash for that little plug. Thanks, mate. Well, I guess we get started with the question that we ask is how do you define culture?
Look, like probably many of your guests have said, it's to me, I've known it as shared goals, shared values and behaviours and agreed behaviours, and that's developed in an environment, a team environment. But I think over the years I've extended that in terms of it's the environment you walk in and you can see it, you can hear it, you witness things around it. So they're key now when I walk into other places and other teams and witness it, and I can see and their environment and give feedback to the coaches afterwards what I witness. So I think it's the environment you create, right? And whether it's the coaching environment, how the coaches behave, how the players interact. But that's my take on culture. And on that, I an example there. A few years ago, I went over to London Irish in there last year, and through Nick Phipps, organised with Les Kiss for me to come in and do a bit of PD, and I just wrote him an email. I spent a day there with him, and just loved the experience because every player come and said hello, or players come and said hello. You could see collaboration. You could see even a guy picking up water bottles to say hello. It was just this amazing environment I witnessed for the day where you were sort of dragged in and felt welcome. And I wrote him an email, and he shot back literally minutes later going, mate, that's brilliant. And he shared that email to the boys on the bus, what I wrote about what I witnessed there. And I said, that is the strength of your team. Now, through the season, they went through a real rough patch of some losses. And that's when you had those Six Nation games on. But they stormed home with six straight wins and either made the semis or made the semis. It didn't surprise me because the strength was in the culture. And I think that's, if you get your culture right, the results will look after itself. That's always my view on it.
Yeah, mate, I agree with you. I think there's a couple of cool things you mentioned there. Like, I love that concept that you said it's something you create. You're the creator. And I love that analogy around the culture as kind of like an experiment, right? You're almost that mad scientist sort of playing around with the formulas and creating a Frankenstein, and it can go either way for good or bad. But I also enjoyed how you said that you extended over time, like you had sort of a way of doing things, and then as time went on, you extended your culture and expanded it. And I think that's an important concept, right? Like, it's not a fixed, this is what you do. It's an evolving organism, right?
Yeah, it is. And every every group's going to be different, right? So it's understanding it and what works best in that environment and how you create that environment to improve that what they have. I said we're going to speak about the Philippines, but obviously in Australian culture, it's a lot of it's organic because it's what they've grown up. The kids, how you play in the backyard together, and it's organic. The culture and the values are similar, but in the Philippine experience, you had to really find your identity and to build your culture and find and really refine that. But so I think, look, if you walked on the training at King's, you'd see our culture. It's quite easy. In the school, you'd see the culture. You can see it, you can feel it, you witness it just the way people talk to each other and they collaborate and the effort they put in. Yeah.
Well, mate, I guess that leads us nicely to the Philippine experience, because you talk about every group is different, and I don't know if you could get a more different group from Australia to the Philippines in terms of everything about not just the game but the culture. And just to start off, you're not got any ancestry to Philippines, correct?
No, white Anglo, unfortunately.
So
love the country, yes.
Yeah, so you're going in super cold, with no background, no nothing. Run us through how that's, mate, that experience of going to a national team and diving into the culture. What did you find, and what were some of the big parts of that culture and that environment?
Yeah, look, I think through one of my fellow coaches, he asked me to come and assist in the first year in 2013. Completely unknown what I was going to experience. No idea. Never holidayed the Philippines, didn't know anything about the culture. So the first thing when I arrived was just the welcoming, the family atmosphere. And that's the thing, if you understand over the years, you learn more of this, but they're very much their biggest values in the house is family, right? Now that people say, oh, it's everywhere, but no, they are. If you ever seen a Filipinos in Sydney or New Zealand, they're generally a family having lunch together. It'd be a group of 20, 30 of them. They can find each other in venues and groups. So family was very much so. I was welcomed in, right? So there was also, from their point of view, being obviously, a relatively high level coach, the players wanted the expertise, right? So they had a thirst to be better. Puso, which means heart, they're brave people. They're also resilient people, but they have a thirst to getting better. So they wanted you to be there to give them feedback. They wanted you to be honest with them. They wanted you to make them better. So they had a real drive to be better people. And that's something that was always evident. Very similar to that Japanese culture. With anything through, training sessions would be done in 30-degree heat, mornings and nights. You couldn't get the boys off the field. They just wanted to do the extras. They wanted to do more. And that's just in their culture. They're very much subsistence, living, and so they work hard day by day, and they never take things for granted. Things aren't gifted to them, so they have a real work ethic like nothing else. Yeah, and that was why I kept doing the 10 years. Just the love I got, as well as all the cultural things you get along the way with people, but the fact that these boys wanted to work hard and get better is what kept me coming back.
Is that something which is quite consistent with a lot of the? Well, like you're dealing with a team which is at the start 71st in the world, and they're 6th tier in the Asian Rugby Championship, so they're right down the bottom. And is it just that they're sponges because they don't have the resource or any sort of expertise? You're just on your own. Is that kind of why there's that hunger, that puso to just get?
Yeah, I think it's what it's bred into them. Like, again, to give you a sort of dynamic with these boys are so. Many of our boys were from Filipino heritage playing overseas. And if you understand the story of those boys, a lot of their mums, dads left for better life overseas. Yes. It was working in hotels, where there was some of the boys had mums who have met men, and they lived overseas and lived sort of lives of the communities they were in over there. Then we had a group of local players. So yes, definitely living in the day-to-day environment of the Philippines. And then we had a couple of expat boys who left home to work in the environment there. So majority of the boys were all heritage players. But one of the things that I always talk about is they the boys overseas didn't know much about the history of the Philippines. I know they immersed themselves in, they wanted a better life. Their parents wanted a better life, so they immersed the country they were in. They immersed in that culture and those values. Back at home, I'll bring them back in, and then it was just finding identity for them because yes, they had all the traits of the Filipinos, but they lacked what their identity was and who they were. And what we used to, what I found is it was always heard the same sort of things when they'd get and talk to each other. And again, I can talk about this later, but it was vulnerability stuff we'd talk about, but to share their stories. A lot of the boys felt when they're overseas, they weren't, whether white enough or whatever country they're in, but when they were back at home, they weren't philo enough because when we brought them into our environment, they connected quickly, whether they were rookies, whether they were experienced players, whether they were players playing in Asia or in Japan. They had shared experiences due to the fact of their identity, lacking some sort of identity. And in this rugby environment, we could drag them in together. And so we built on that, So, it's really unique. It's hard to explain. Like, I suppose what it's very similar. The perception is everyone's playing from the Philippines. No, there is a small amount of players that from the Philippines, and they do have a local comp. The comp is expanding, and that's over time. It'll hopefully get bigger, and you can draw more players from locally. But majority of the players are playing overseas. They've left home and they're playing overseas, and they're left home because their mothers and dads are looking for a life outside of there to bring money back to the family as well, back home. So that's why if you ever, a lot of countries, you go to Singapore, you go to Hong Kong, there's a line for Filipino workers, right? Because they go everywhere to work, the jobs that people don't want to do. It's maids, it's cleaners, it's hotel cleaners, it's everything. So, so it's really unique, mate. And anytime, very similar to Fijians, when we travel, and I remember we played a test match in 2014 in Sri Lanka in Colombo. Amazing, 30,000 people, huge crowd. Anyway, we won it and won it on the bell. Well, after the bell, and there was probably about 1,000 Filipinos. And I said, boys, whose family's up here? I said, they're not our family. They just come to watch. They're the workers, So the home always drags them in. They're very proud of their heritage, right? So, and as you know, with Fijian boys are very similar. The Fijian families, they'll come out of woodwork and they'll find each other, and that's how the rugby's really existed, is word of mouth, how we find players and things like that. But I can talk about that later. But it's amazing how we found players and find players and what we set up to make that happen. So hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah.
Sorry, mate.
No, mate. Well, you said a couple of things there, which I'm interested to dive into a little bit. Like, I understand that kind of dynamic where the generational players are not wherever they're living. They're Filipino descent, but they haven't lived in Philippines, so they don't have that innate connection to the place through an upbringing there. How do you? Like, you talked about making that team the shared experience. So they come back, and the team's almost like the middle ground, isn't it? Where we can get that connection for you, because we've got those that are deeply enrooted and grown up here, those that are coming back, and all different variations. What do you do in that nest to really bring that out?
Yeah, great question, mate. So again, not arrogance, but my first 2 years, I coached them how I'd coach an Aussie boys. I just content in, do this, do that. And I never really dived into understanding who they were. And yes, we had great success. So with the fourth, we played Japan in 2013-14. We had Japan in it, in our Asian Five Nations. It'd be a 6-week campaign. We had Japan, we had Korea, we had Hong Kong, and we had Sri Lanka was 1 year, and we had UAE another year. And we were the fourth. Our aim was always to beat either UAE or Sri Lanka to retain in that division. And we did that successfully, but I was never happy with the performance. It was just up and down. It wasn't consistent. And I realized I'm stuffing this up. It's not the boys. So I blame, I got to stop blaming the boys and I realized that we had to develop, we had connection. The strength was their connection. We had to develop an identity of what it was. And I know Eddie talks about with Japan. So one of the things was not only were they able to come up with a game model, look, they're brave. Filipinos are brave. So physicality was a big thing. So we played direct and we played, scrummed long. We kicked the corners. We had good backs, but our strength was the resilience and the bravery of the Filipinos. They loved contact. They'll feel it. So, and we found other nations, in the subcontinent weren't that. So we knew that was a strength of ours. So we played a really direct game to really, really bully teams. But before we did that, we had to actually get our identity right. So, yes, we come up with looking at our values and agreed behaviours. So that's when that Puso, that family and resilience and work ethic, those values. And I thought, how do you do family? How do you do Puso? But family was making sure we had time for connection. So vulnerability exercises, let's hear stories from the rookies coming in. I said there wasn't a hierarchical system. Yes, there was leaders and unit leaders, but I love the fact that everyone was on a level. A new guy would come in, he was treated quickly, brought in the group. Never felt intimidated. He never had sat in the back. He was always pushed the front. So the boys are really keen. So we do a vulnerability exercise, and the boys would get up there and talk about their stories. And it came down, and Justin Coveney was a player, but also a trained lawyer. Okay. And he would talk about us. Great. I said, JC, I just need you, mate. Vulnerability. We want to get in deep with these experiences. These boys the rookies, because I'm pretty confident it's the same stories that everyone's sitting around. Mm. And I said to you we had Chris Hickey. I brought Chris Hickey in as help me coaching, but as a second set of eyes just to look over the program. And it's one of the things he sort of got really good around the game model for helping me. And these boys would talk about how their parents left home and lived tough lives overseas. And the boys are talking about how they, didn't feel connected to where they're living. They'd come home but you'd be sitting there in tears listening to these stories, incredible tears, and everyone would be in tears, and coaches would be in tears. But it was also a strength. So although they had connections, it bonded the group stronger because they had such shared experience. The same stories would be told each year. I mean, yes, there'd be a bit of humour at the back end. We'd ask questions about things we don't know about you, and I can't tell those things online. But but it was just brilliant to hear the stories of the sacrifices that mums and dads made to give them a better life, the kids a better life somewhere else. And it's a shame but from that, we realised, okay, well, what they don't have is they don't have knowledge of the Philippines. And there's so much. And more I dug deep and spoke to I had a general manager, Jake Letts, who was an ex-player, realised and we had Lapu Lapu as our mascot. And Lapu Lapu, understanding Lapu Lapu was a chief warrior, a Filipino chief warrior, and he lived. Spanish had rule of Philippines for 300 years, 333 years, and it was a tough life for the Filipinos. But Lapu Lapu had victories against the Spanish. He killed one of their major captains, but a very strong warrior and revered. But again, we had Lapu Lapu as a mascot, but they actually didn't know the history of Lapu Lapu. So we dug deep in that. And we looked at all their heroes. I said to you before we started, I had an assistant coach who was a front rower, but he came as assistant forwards coach. His grandfather's revered in Philippines because he was part of the Philippine resistance in the Second World War. And his job was an assassin. He'd go in and create mayhem. And so we had all these great stories that these boys didn't know about. And so we would share these experiences, and that brought back to that resilience part and that Puso. So we then, and we looked at, they have tribal tattoos as well. So, and we looked at that, and then we started going, well, how do we see this every day? So we had tribal the tattoos put on our playing jerseys and our training kit. We'd have man of the match would be based around the values of it, of those values, right? Not about the best player in the match, those brave, resilient player on the field, who's just fearless. And so we instigated all these things around our identity. We changed language. I'd deliver them in English in terms of the playbooks, and then, we immersed the playbooks in language, so the boys learn the national anthem, but we started behaving what the local, you know, legends would be like. So, and it really, I learned so much from that, because I think I learned more about myself, that you've got to really delve deep into the history of clubs and your organisation and find out what works. And that, to me, then we just got consistency of performance. Look, you didn't have to tell these boys to train hard. But it gave you, because they would work hard online. There was just bravery everywhere, and you're seeing things from boys that you never, unbelievable things, well beyond their ability, but bravery, putting your body on the line. And so that's why we're ranked 42 or 41 or 40 in the world with very little budget, mate. With very little, they are just resilient people. Don't complain about the resource we have. They don't complain. It's a pleasure. It was absolute pleasure to coach them every day. I loved every minute. And I would love to see money invested from world rugby into Asian rugby. A lot of money invested, because they just need resource and facilities. We gave them anything. We bring things over, but we pinch and get things in there, but really they need support, and COVID's hit them hard, and they lost a lot of sponsorship, and then they're gradually building. But just wonderful people. So I encourage people to get there and actually understand a bit about the Philippines.
Mate, I love it. And I love this vulnerability story piece, because, and particularly to unite a group together over shared set of things. And I think it's important, because I hear this a lot, like almost the phrase, you're a plastic whatever. You're a plastic Filipino, because you're Filipino, but you're not really, because you haven't lived here. But exactly. what you're highlighting is when you actually hear their side, or, and the whole team hears that, it actually connects the group a bit quicker, isn't it? Because it highlights a different perspective of the same thing. Like, yes, I didn't grow up here, but my parents had to slog it out over there. And then you feel it. You hear the backstory. You hear that behind the scenes of one of your teammates. And then you go, actually, that's bloody awesome. And then all of a sudden, you're a group, rather than not doing that sort of stuff and having those little sentiment differences like, oh, he didn't grow up here, he doesn't know who we are, all that stuff. Yeah. It does the opposite, doesn't it? And so too does what you're talking about, the history. The history is for educating everybody, not just those that aren't there, including coaching staff. And
definitely.
And when you do it together as a collective, you learn at the same pace, you understand it. And those that know a little bit more can chip in, and it just becomes, again, the shared experience which grows a group, right?
It does. And it's a reference point to get back to all the time, right? And when you display those behaviours, that's an example of it, right? So and look, part of that vulnerability, I would do stuff as well. I'd get up and talk, and I know for the rookies before they come in, like I'm very much, connection before correction. So I'd send out for the rookies that come in and haven't met me other than online. I'd send a bit about me and what my what I love to do, and what I'm good at and what I'm not good at, and then you get up there and speak, and then so. Yeah, I just thought I got in a real sweet spot. With coaching staff, we got a real sweet spot of connecting the group, and that's the strength of that. And from that, I took that back, and I take that back to Kings. I took it back to teams now as really understanding that you've got to work on your identity before anything else, and your values, right? So it's almost like we have content planning for training, but it's a separate training session that you got to put time into.
I love it, mate. That connection before correction. That's a great statement. How much do you get? How much have you found when you just talked about that, what you're good at, what you're not good at? Like a lot of coaches would struggle with the not good at, but publicly to say to the team, I'm not good at this aspect of whatever. And that's that vulnerability piece again, isn't it? That just opens you up, makes you more real and human. What sort of stuff do you talk about as a coach about, particularly on the what you're not good at side? Because that's something some would struggle with.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm a generous coach, so it's just the way I've learned. Like I've managed people. I don't have expertise, and I'm not scared. And I think it's Smithy talks about it. I'm not scared bringing better people in who are better than me on areas. Because I don't have an ego. I'm up front. What I love, I'm a teacher. I'm a PE teacher. I'm a teacher. I love to make people, better or reach where they want to get to. So I would be open and going, well, look, if I don't have the answer, I'm going to find out for you. So my strengths are really understanding, the culture pit, the identity, building that. Look, when I say I'm jealous, I know a lot about everything, but it's a bit like I'm not great at anything, So, and that's my own fault. That's probably been something I should have knuckled down and done more of. Although I played halfback, I had more time with forwards and understanding their role than what the backs did. And I dictated if the ball went out wide, if the winger stuffed up, he wasn't getting the ball. And the next time we were just playing 9-man rugby, right? But I would talk more about, what I do know and say I've got, sometimes I can get stroppy but it's never personal, or sometimes I can be direct with my communication because you're the value. But that's why my thing I spoke to the boys is getting their values and their behaviours, what their behaviours was a guideline, and all I did is kept them. If they veered outside those guidelines, I'd rip into them. Inside that, they come up with what they expect from each other and the effort and all that sort of stuff. If they worked on that, I didn't need really to speak other than just guide coaches and give feedback on what I'm saying and maybe little technical things. But if they stepped outside that, the group, you bring them back in. And it was not, look, I think. Yes, when I first started coaching, I only coached how I learnt, which was very authoritarian. When the generation I started, and all my coaches were authoritarian. I was a captain through my life a lot of times. I never liked authoritarian coach because I actually thought I knew more than the coach. That was just a little bit of arrogance for me as a young guy. But as I went, I did, obviously teaching, and then I did a master's in sports coaching. I realised that it's collaborative, right? So I really, I know some of the questions you asked about what do people would disagree with you. I'm actually less at the back end of the week. I'm less coaching. The leaders are coaching. So I've set up leadership groups. So all of that work in that conversation is a lot of my work. I do a lot of that effort. But where I'm poor, where I'm not poor, but more about just the technical side. I think I bring people in to do that, and I let people know like this is what I'm good at. This is what I can give you feedback on. So that's there. I think that's where, and I'm still. Yeah, every year I have a PD to learn scrums. How hard is it? Just push harder. I mean,
that's the generalist attitude of scrums, isn't it? Push harder.
But I'd love to know more because it's such an art, right? And I should know more. But anyway. So that's
Well, if you've been around front rowers at a high level, they can sit around having coffee talking about the technicalities of scrum all day. And if you're not that way inclined, it'll be another foreign language to you. But I think it's an important point you say, mate, around that generalist coach. And I love the open honesty that you speak that is, because you do know enough largely as a coach. There's sometimes this sort of expectation that you've got to know everything, and it never ends. Like there's always a different way of doing a technique or something like that. But at some point you've got to say to yourself, I know enough here. Now the best aspect for me to do is actually learn how to deliver it better, to connect with people, to actually motivate them to do this better. And that's the real art of coaching is sort of when you realize that moment in yourself where you go away from the X's and O's and go into sort of the L's and C's, the leadership and culture aspect. Because once you know enough, mate, then it becomes like the motivational piece. And if you nail that, you're away, eh?
Yeah, and that's where I've got to the last sort of 5-6 years or 10 years now. I've realised it's all those areas, right? And I'm working on getting better at that, and that's hence why I said I love to do podcasts, because they're the things I find you bring success to teams, and where I can add real value with that, and that's where I think for me I feel comfortable around that space and understand people, right? So and I think I've just noticed in my journey, the more I've worked on that, I've found myself consistent. My teams are consistently successful, or getting to the point where we want to get. And I think that's because of that, taking the time to build identity, culture, leadership groups, what is our team identity, so those things. And then, you just put the layers of technical and tactical over it on top of that. And that's where some people your assistants can help.
It does seem to be the reoccurring theme. The more experienced coaches get, the more they realize this is the bigger rock of coaching anyone, anything.
Well, it's interesting, mate. I remember reading an article. They did a survey they looked at all like Man U when they're at the best, Real Madrid, Barcelona, and they thought, well, what brings success in your team? What is it you're doing that? And a lot of it came back to relationships. And they said, well, why then do coaches spend 90% of the week on content of skills and drills, when what actually brings is the identity, the relationships, living to the values. And it was an interesting point, right? So that's I heard that and read that and going and so 90% of the members said what brought them success, why they're successful is the environment and understanding identity and understanding, the connections in that piece, even from a professional sport like soccer, which sometimes it looks very individual, but it was interesting. So, yeah, and that when I heard that, probably 5-6 years ago, that reinforced to me that, yeah. So I purposely, and that's a big challenge at Kings in a school environment, adding though, how do you bring that cultural bit, or identity bit into your training week? Because it's really important to bring success. So, yes, in a school or a training, especially a club footy, Tuesday, Thursday night, you've got so much detail to get through, get ready for Saturday. When do you bring in that, which is another important thing, which is building your values and your identity and evaluating that each week. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you just brought in the school aspect of that, because similar to those sort of, I'll use this phrase, the plastic Filipinos that don't feel connected. And they come back and probably with a bit of reservation, trepidation around, oh, geez, do I fit in here? All that kind of thing. But when you talk about a school and you've got 600-700 rugby players, each rugby player is coming into their teams and environments with that same sort of thing, like some sort of backstory where they're not quite sure. And the moment you can cut through that and make them feel connected to the team, then they feel like they're part of it, and they go above and beyond in trying to nail the stuff, the content you're actually talking, because they feel connected, bonded with the group. And so that's the art for a coach, is knowing that everyone's got a backstory. How do you sort of quieten the noise that's going through the head so they can just nail with enjoy and excitement the stuff that you're actually teaching, which is the rugby stuff?
Yeah, well, look, what I do is work more with I have relationships with all the boys, and but it's intimate. It's hard. How do you look after 600 boys? But it's really important. Speak to my coaching staff about, and I've got, as you would know, I've got 70 coaches, 75 coaches. I've got to deliver my expectations of how we develop those connections. So I give them time. You need to put that in. You need to make that priority for this week. Give them time. I don't need to see you kicking a ball around the beginning of training. Work on those vulnerability. Learn a little bit more about, get a boy out in front. In the bigger, wider groups, you can have discussions, sit down and speak to, the 13-year-olds later on and how their behaviour is going and what's our identity. And, like Owen Eastwood talks about, what do people want to see? And so we're building the culture of that part. But I think, really working with the coaches, that's why, yes, I'm a director of rugby, but I'm really a director of coaching, because I think it's really important that I coach the coaches, and it's easy just to filter down from the coaches. And again, we've just got a really, really good happy place. It's not always about, wins and losses, because I don't think that's really important at a young age. Yes, for, as you would know, our ones and twos, which are performance teams. But I think the younger age is just trying to develop, and you're trying to make them the complete player not the complete player, a really good player when they leave your program. So I think really instilling those values and developing your identity and understanding what's expected as a rugby player. Look, the King's School is really good on understanding the values, like getting boys to understand it. It's drummed into them, they live by it. All we do is refine those that are based around rugby, but we do take great pride in trying to be, the leaders of a leading sport of those values and probably the biggest compliment I think we got. Bob Dwyer said, I know a Kingsman when he comes out of the school, just the way they can listen, they can articulate, they've got a great work ethic. So, you can tell a Kings guy, and we always get feedback. I know, your boys are probably the same, but we get feedback from coaches about the Kings boys in rep teams. They say, oh my God, your boys are so in tune about what their role is. They ask questions, they've got a great work ethic, but that's all filtered down from our coaching staff. And then obviously we have probably similar to you guys. You've got your older boys working with teams. On game day, the first and seconds boys will be with the teams and identifying this is how we behave. This is what we expect. So it's just immersing boys in behaviours all the time of our breed behaviours.
Yeah, mate, I think that's important. Like what the phrase you just said there, what someone looks like when they leave your program.
Yeah.
and I think that's great because it makes you, as a coach, you shift the way you're thinking more long term, aren't you?
Yep.
When your
Yes.
goals is what people will look like once they leave. So they're not just a piece of meat doing a job for you now. They're
Yep.
actually a part of this bigger legacy piece, which is for you in the school setting, is you want the students coming out of the school to be upstanding members of the
Correct.
community. And so all of a sudden your rugby shifts to a values-based things, which it is in rugby, and you're
Yeah.
actually coaching values rather than the
Correct.
X's and O's
Correct.
of the game, right?
Correct. Correct. Yep. And look, X and O's, and we just do fundamentals. It's really basic stuff. I
Ah,
know. So that's, I think, yes, I've written a curriculum for the school, and but we've got stages 1, 2, 3. But we actually got a stage 4 is once they leave. So boys are encouraged back to come, but also we want the boys to have a love of rugby, whether they play league, whether they play, but we want them to love rugby. And hopefully some of those boys will be a coach, might be a manager, might be a parent helping out the local club. That's what we want. And that's that's how we measure our success on that, is the involvement of the boys still and the love of the game. Look, I never had problems having coaches. I've got an oversupply of ex-old boys coming back in, and that tells me our program is flourishing when you've got to turn boys away from helping you out, so they love the experience.
mm. And how do you get that balance in a place like the Philippines, mate, where rugby isn't widely known, where you've actually
Yep,
got to put some
that's it.
serious thought into actually teaching the game? So teaching that X's and O's, but how do you manage that balance between what we're talking about here is the importance of culture in a place where rugby is not inherent?
Yeah, look, from a term, from the boys coming in, there is a vast range of abilities. You've got boys playing professional rugby, um, probably playing Japan or playing France or UK. Then you've got boys playing community rugby. So you've got that aspect of it where you've got to find a middle ground and find what works. So that's when we spoke about how the game model, we work that out, dealing with this, probably their skill set. We also know we've got to try to grow the game. The local game, basketball's the number one sport. Beautiful country, but they're not tall people, but they love their basketball.
Yeah.
So, but they're very good basketballers, very good basketballers. They love basketball. They love a bit of soccer. So rugby is still growing. We do have small pockets, and it's getting better, and they're athletic. So, give them a game of touch. It's fast, So over years, that'll eventually get into contact, So there's a lot more. Now there's touch tournaments over there, Oztag tournaments, which, expats have brought over. So a lot of our boys are getting into that. So they're getting more skilled. On top of that, you've got to grow the game. Look, what we've always done is we've always made it a priority, whether a 5-week campaign or a normal test match campaign would be 10 weeks into 2 test matches in 8 days. So it'd be 18 days. Regardless of how busy our schedule those 10 days, we make sure we're doing something, whether we're going to orphanages and playing touch footy with the kids, and whether we're going to town and look, the Filipinos, they love selfies, so they love. So nationally, we are known, but not big. They just see us as they see boys as celebrities, sort of, in a way, not massive. But so the boys will be very open, with photos. Obviously, we'll have commitments in terms of launches of certain clothing. I think our boys will go, and the boys who are there living there full time will get on talk shows, and they're very big on their talk shows, and so the boys will be involved in a lot of things, and they're always promoting the game. So the boys are far; it's difficult, but the boys are left locally. They're always promoting the games. Look, Filipinos love winners. So anytime you're your 4th ranked nation team, they love it, right? So they get behind you in a way, right? So it's it's an incredible experience. So obviously we've got sponsors there, and we'll do, whether it's in the gym and things like that, we'll do things. So it is growing the game. Time is difficult because we don't have, again, the boys from overseas are only really in for 18 days.
Yep.
But when we are there, we're working. We've done things like we've gone in, and again, part of that was a bit for the boys to understand. We built terraces. So they had projects going where families built their own house, 2-story terrace houses. You built your own. So families are building literally their own house next to each other. You don't work on anyone else's house. But we came in and gave them a hand during our campaigns to build houses. So one that was to help the community, but also for our boys who again, who have gone overseas, and yeah, they've still got privileged lives, to see a little bit about how and be proud of the resilience and what they're doing, and boys love it. So some of those experiences are talked
Amazing.
about more so than games. It's just what they give back and what they got back from the locals helping them out, and they just felt part of a family. So, boys would see running water would be bits coming out of a pump, and our boys would take off a sock and put a sock over it because they couldn't handle seeing the local kids drinking, unfiltered water like that. So it was experiences like that that really galvanised the group, and they're appreciative from their parents' side what the sacrifice they made, but also they got plenty out of it, knowing that this means a lot to people,
Mm.
and again, it just meant a continued success. So. Yeah,
Mm.
it is truly amazing experience, mate. It's you see it from a different lens. I said originally I turned up, an Aussie guy, Aussie coach, give me the team, I'll coach them, and then falling in love with the place, realizing there's so many layers to these boys that
Mm.
make them who they are because of the resilience and the history there. So,
Did
um,
Stu, did you see this kind of happen when you created these sort of opportunities for players to connect with the local communities? And do you feel they developed the pride and like,
that 100%,
and did
100%.
that flow through? Because this is where a lot of people, that some people listening would go, but where does it relate to actually performance? But do you think that pride in the team actually equated
It did.
to when they got on the training field, they're actually more invested, did it
They were,
better? Is that what you saw? Did you see
yeah,
that link?
definitely, and that's what and you could just see it. Yes, every national anthem people cry, but it was just the intense build up to things. It wasn't letting themselves down. It was letting the nation down. It was letting their families down. So, mate, we would have days where we'd open training sessions and families would come on and stay all day and watch you train. So they just, yeah, they would win. They would performance for families. It wasn't about. It was selfless. It wasn't about themselves. Right. I said these boys go back and play another league somewhere else and win loss, but they took pride in their performance because they knew what it meant for their mother, or their dads back, where they were. It meant for the local people, it meant for the rugby community. They needed this, and also needed knowing that success would bring potentially more people into the game, right? So there was so much riding on our success, right? And through that, I was through the golden period. I come, and it wasn't me who started this. It was Jared Hodges one, Expo. It was another coach, and they initially got this up. Matt Cullen was the general manager. He's an Aussie expat. They got it all started, and I just was in the golden period where we just added on, and we had success. So, but again, it works with their bravery and their resilience. All this.
Yeah, I love it, man. I love how at the very start of this conversation you talked about the environment you create, and I love how you're actually creating that national pride.
Yes.
And that does equate to performance and performance for family. Like that's the
Yeah.
underlying driver. And a lot of things you've talked about here, like using the history, using the lapu lapu, that history to connect players and changing the language, all this stuff is creating this
Yeah.
national pride in a national team, which is not just for show and a feel good factor, even though it is that, it's actually a performance driver too, isn't it? That's this
Yeah.
bit which
I'm
hard to measure.
sold on it.
Yeah,
It's
you
exactly
are.
right, and I, obviously we've seen, uh, Fijian teams, the sevens teams. We had overseas coaches, and they really immersed themselves in the Fijian culture and really working hard on their identity, and that brought those performances of gold medals, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's my advice. I know, advice
Yeah.
to any person taking an international team. You can't look at it through the lens of what you've just coached. You've actually got to. Your first priority has to be get to know the country you're in, understand the way they tick, understand what their history is, and understand, their families and how they operate together, and then you can build that.
Uh,
Then you can look at assess their skills when you see it, and you go, okay, well then you're going to mold it all together. Um,
hey,
Definitely look. The Philippines has many challenges. I'm saying it's rosy, but look, I had, being an Australian there, working there, you want everything done now. And in Philippines, it's not always done like that. So traveling through Asia and working through Asia, you've got to be. I developed my own resilience and calmness because you can't even plan for the unexpected, because it does happen. Whether it's a typhoon hitting you right then, or one time basically we're getting test match ready and we had a lightning storm that hit the goalpost where we were training, and how do you plan that in? How do you plan, a bus not turning up because someone's fallen asleep at the bus depot? But that's where it's where I was smart enough to realise that I brought in Grant Rice, who's an ex-GM or CEO of Aussie guy, but played rugby league, a good level rugby league, just a doer. Brought him in because he could work. He knew what my standards were and what my expectation was, but he also knew how the locals operate. So he was the middleman of just getting things done and looking after me and not getting me frustrated, where I can just concentrate on looking after the team and the coaches and the players. And he would look after all the logistics as well as the GM, Jake Letts, at that side. But the GM was generally, the bigger picture stuff. Ricey was always doing the day-to-day stuff, getting the pads out, or getting where's the washing from yesterday done? Where is that? Yeah. So things just happened differently. That's what I loved about the place, because it was different, right? Whereas, and that's for any coach. You need to take that in and understand coaching those tier one. They say they lower tiers, that things are just done differently to what a high performance team. But you can still create a high performance environment just within the parameters you're working in, right?
Mate, I think, Stu, you've got a really awesome mindset. Like initially you came in and you knew yourself, you knew your strengths and weaknesses, and you're open enough to say, here they all are. But it's also awesome to hear that you're actually open enough to grow yourself. Like, here's what I didn't do right. Here's where I'm growing. Here's the people I need around me to actually make me better. And this experience is making me better, which if you have a coach with that sort of mindset, man, it's got to feed on to players, right? Especially at the national level of a tier 6 Asian team. Now, one thing I've got for you, because I'm really intrigued about, like, what's your model based off? Because when you go into a team like the Philippines, like not a strong side, and you can look at all sorts of models, and how do you pick? Yeah, like, for example, you wouldn't pick the All Blacks and say we need to be doing what they're doing, because it just doesn't equate, does it? There's a lot. It's a lot of coaches out there see what the All Blacks are doing, or England are doing, or South Africa are doing, but it's not the same context. Just to said at the start, every team's different. So to cut and paste, or try to cut and paste, and most coaches, it's tough to paste well. You miss the heart of your team and what you need, right? And sometimes you're doing things for, not the best interests of you, but for someone else. How did you do it? How did you find yourselves in there?
Yeah, I said earlier, there was naivety to me in the first couple of years. Cut and paste it, whereas I had enough awareness to realise things aren't working, or things aren't getting to where they need to get. And so part of that was actually then developing a leadership group and having a collaborative effort to come up with the plans. What works best for us? What do you guys want to do? What do you think is our strength? And a lot of these guys have been playing before I got there, were playing test matches, so they knew actually what their strengths were.
Yep.
They knew what they liked. So we developed a game model from that leadership group. So a lot of those conversations we had. These are the Facebook days. Wasn't necessarily about Zoom days, because Zoom came later in the COVID days. This was all on Messenger and setting up WhatsApp sort of group chats, and just developing. And then, relinquishing a bit of power and saying, "Oh, boys, what do we need to come up with?" Yeah, look, because you had a variance in rugby IQ, you just had to make sure. So if there's things that I think we should have been doing, I imposed myself, and they were okay with that. And I spoke to them about that, because that's more so they probably didn't have, probably the learnings from that, and that's part of why they wanted me there. They wanted to know more. How can we get better, and how can we make this situation better that we've got? So, but they were good. They were smart enough to identify their strengths and their weaknesses as a group, and then we developed the game models about that. A lot of those boys, as I said, they grew up in Australia and New Zealand, so in Great Britain, and so they could kick a ball, they could pass a ball. Yes, there's variance in their skills, and but they were smart enough to understand. They were smart enough to not make the game too hard. So we really had a simple model, mate. It wasn't the ball in play probably in that level, who you're playing against, there's a lot of drop ball. So the ball in play isn't as great as probably high level, tier one teams. So, but that's why we had to play probably a more direct game and carry more and use power. And then, we had great set of backs, but again, but it was all, we found the line out wasn't great all the time because you just hadn't cohesion together. You weren't together regularly. So we had to come up with smaller line outs, trick plays, things like that. So I think it was a collaborative, and that's again why I brought people in. Greg Mum, I brought, Chris Hickey in, and then even the 19s, one of your boys that you've got coaching, I brought Campese Mafu in to help out with them because I used to have to look after 19s as well, not just the opens, because I wanted to make sure I had a pathway and new players coming in, because we didn't have necessarily. Again, to get selected was really word of mouth. People put CVs in, you'd look at any footage. So I looked at the 9, and so I just brought people in to just clean up and tidy up those little areas. And again, also, mate, I think the mistake I made is I tried to do too much at the beginning. Like I tried to cover so many areas and realize, especially in those 10-day training camps, where I got better was, and they were talking about the macro, the micro, the micro was just making sure I got those 10 days down pat of recovery, of commitments to media, training. Also, we had boys coming in from different time zones, right, and heat zones. So I had to have heat. Like I had the boys in saunas and bars in England because it was 5 degrees and about to jump into 35 degrees plus 90% humidity. You had to have heat strategies in before they come in because my first 2 years, you had boys just passing out in the first 2 days from the heat and they just couldn't acclimatise to it. So I got really good on getting that really effective 10 days of training, enough to hit the ground running when test matches we were firing, and as well as you stick in that all the cultural stuff and all the vulnerability, it was non-stop. But we had the boys come up with, we had it basically, our camp was a lovely hacienda. It was sort of like 2 levels. The boys were sleeping upstairs. Downstairs would be your TV room or your meeting room, and normally I'd have a meeting room well away from your team room because you can get lazy and fall asleep. But we're working again. But we had no phones policy. The boys kept no phones. It was never a problem. Every night you'd have a guitar down there. You'd have chess down there. I had playbooks. I had all the who we're playing around the wall. We had photos of when they're celebrating success of their past victories. You had the whole place immersed. It would be heaving every night. You'd have to tell the boys to go to bed because my room would be off there. Boys, go to bed. Like we're up training at 6 a.m. because you're trying to escape the heat. You train 6 to 8 and then train at 5 to 7 at night. Boys, go to bed, like because they just loved. And they would sit there and they'd have their little micro meetings, and that's how they developed their game plan and their game model. So I love, by the end of it, I just facilitated. And mate, when you've got everything right, when you're actually sitting in a banana lounge because everything's just humming because they're doing it all themselves, you're doing well. And so it was a really good example to myself going, you do all that groundwork and then you're just facilitating. That leadership, again, I'm probably going off track a little bit, but just it's all those little things creates an environment where you're essentially just taking a back seat because they've got everything going, they're humming, they know what the expectation of each other, they know their game model, they've developed it, they have input in it, and it's just, there's mistakes made. And we train like, I've seen Eddie do it. We train with buckets of soapy balls because, mate, humidity is like, you can be playing a match in bright sunshine in Sri Lanka and then be torrential rain, like a monsoon with 100 mils in 1 hour. So you've got to...
Yeah, and that's the context, isn't it? Like understanding what you've got and your environment and your team specifically.
Yeah, so all of Southeast Asia is humid, mate. So, but then we'd play up in Korea in these Asian, and it's 5 degrees. Mate, we played Japan in 2013. We left Japan. This is 2000. Eddie was coaching and Scotty Wiseman was assistant coach. We played them at Fukuoka at level 5 stadium. I mean, they pumped us, but
121 mil, wasn't it?
It was cool runnings. We literally got the tracksuits made. They've never had a tracksuit made because why do you need a tracksuit? And you could actually hold up the light and see through the light. We get off the boat, off the plane, Fukuoka, It's 5 degrees with a wind chill of -5, and we played like that. So at halftime, the halftime chat wasn't about the boys, what they've got to work on. It was actually just getting them warmed. It was hot because I was freezing. But again, like we just had extremes, and you had to work with that. And as we went on, I was a bit more prepared, and
Love it, mate.
yeah,
Well,
cool experience.
I think it's a cool statement, not to come in and your learnings around not coming in and just changing everything. It's much like you jump on the bench press. You don't just load it up with more than
Yeah,
you can do. It's always that a little bit at a time, incremental gains around the
yeah,
bits you can handle. And I think that's quite a good analogy, because if you
yeah,
do try lift 150 kilos, there's gonna be repercussions elsewhere. Even if you do manage to do it, you're going to be so sore you're not going to be able to do the back exercise, which is the
yeah,
next other bit. And rugby's not just a one aspect, it's such a big scoping thing, especially at the national team where you're actually representing a whole lot other than just the game. It's important. But one thing I did think, Stu, which is an important little side just to reflect on, is that leadership group you talked about, because it's the way it's a lot of people talk about these leadership groups, but you mentioned it's your feedback group. It's a sounding board, and it's your feedback for what's working on the ground. And I like a reference. Some of the Japanese companies I've been involved with on the factory floor, they give a lot of free license to anyone on that factory floor that sees something can be done better. They have to speak up. There's boards put out where you go right up. This needs a change. And as a manager, you wouldn't see all those little nuances. But when you go back to your leadership and you make everyone a leader, you can actually get some amazing little shifts at a time, which ultimately end in big ones. And you talked about relinquishing a bit of power. And potentially, I think you have to concede at times if needed. And then acknowledgement that it's a collaboration. And that's the way this generation is, which is different from the previous one, where it was a lot more dictatorships in theory and authoritarian. These days, coaching is not that. It's a collaboration. And if you don't shift in that regard, there's a
yeah,
chance that the culture will never shift.
yeah.
Now, Stu, have you taken anything back? Like any big rocks that you've taken that you would take from the Filipino culture back to sort of tier one countries that you go, this is something that they do so well here from a really young rugby country that they do well, which we could learn from tier one countries?
Look, I can only talk from my experience at tier 3. I think we're classed as, or you said tier 6, but it's understanding your identity. I think sometimes potentially those tier ones, you're in a high performance. Things are lavish. I think what you notice here is there's a real resilience, understanding that nothing is taken for granted because of what they get. Everything they get is received well. It's respected, and whether it was what people saw generally is that when we're playing test matches, we're in nice accommodation for the test match week because the host nation is part of the requirement of Asian rugby, but they don't see the 10 days what you're sort of dusty grounds, you know, trying to find hit shields that enough for the team, trying to find someone who's washing the the bibs and the water bottles washed out, so that's something, and I know they do it well. I do know the All Blacks do that well. They're appreciative, and they make sure everyone in a team environment are welcomed and received and respected. So I think, again, don't lose sight of that, because those tiers down there have minimal resources. They can run an organisation on a sniff and oily rag and get really good outcomes and to keep growing the game and actually getting results. We can never measure ourselves. Philippine reality is we got as far as we could get. We won the division, Div 1. We played in the Asian Five Nations, kept our position there, and then it broke up going, it was too expensive for us. It was 5 weeks of campaign. Our boys are taking time off work. They've got to pay their own fare to get in. They get looked after once in, but they've got to pay their own fare to play. Well, then they broke it down to sort of an 18-day campaign with 3 test matches with 10-day leading. Again, they had to fly their own way in, but those 10 days, they're just, you're working with bare minimum, in terms of you're making the most out of people working really hard. So I think, don't lose sight of the luxury, how you're well looked after, but also, I tell you, Marcus Smith is a Filipino boy.
Or maybe if you try to recruit him back?
Well, I tell you a little story I'll go back to because he does give back to the game. He comes and visits. So I was looking after the 19s and we were playing Korea in a test match the next day. And little boy turned up with his dad, little fella, 15, 16-year-olds, old boy, Filipino boy. We're doing some exits. And Dad said, do you need him? Do you need extra bodies somewhere? Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I need a back three. And then, yeah, what does he play? He plays 10, but he can play fullback. Shoved him in there. So we're just doing a typical, two-phase exit, off the side piece, hit up, short man liner, hit up and kicked up. And we've got an organised kick chase line. Score. I went, oh, my God, what was this? What was that? Okay, go again. Did it again. Boop. Went through our line, scored. I looked at the general manager, Jake, was up in there. I said, how old does he have to be to play tomorrow? I said, he's got to be 17. And I saw this kid and going, this kid, and I've seen a lot of good kids back at home, this kid was special. And then, 3 years later, I'm watching his selected as an 18-year-old. I'm text Jake Lex, mate, did you just see who made the England squad? Marcus, all those years. And Charlie Lawrence was another boy who's just playing for Japan. He's another boy that I coached for 2 years, another exceptional guy. But yeah, so I think I'm getting back, a bit of a segue, but a lot of those boys still give back to the game and still have a love for the game. So we get a lot of messages when we play. Those guys will send messages in and wishing our boys all the luck and stuff like that. So, and I know Marcus came down with his brother last year and, gave some time to the Filipinos, so trying to grow the game. And we've set up hubs as well, so overseas. But so basically for those top tier nations, just not lose sight of where they're at. I think that's really what I'd say.
I'd say the joy is never lost. In fact, it's magnified in places where you're playing for the sheer love of the game, isn't it?
That's a real good point. Yep.
Now, it's got to that time, Stu. Well, it's time to wrap up. You've sort of lightly touched on the last question, but I'd love you to dive a little bit deeper to finish us off. What's one belief you hold about culture that you reckon your peers would disagree with?
I wouldn't say all disagree, but what I see a lot of, whether it's a kids campaign into a tournament, whether it's a club, they'll get straight in the X and O's and not develop the culture. I think that's your foundation. You've got to set that up, and it's expectation of your coach as well, because I see really poor coaching by they're not holding themselves to the same standards they expect from the boys. So I think really taking the time, whether it's a campaign in a 3-day tournament, whether it's a season, get quickly onto the developing your values, your identity, and your culture, and what you expect from each other. So you've got alignment, and then you feed off that, and then you can get in it. Because that means every training session, you've always got a reference point to go back to. Where are we happy with that? Did we live up to the standards that we expect from each other? Where do we need to tidy up? So I see it, and whether it's just people don't know, but they get straight in the X and O's and don't spend any time on that. And they'll have some success, but I see a lot of failure on that. And it's pretty easy to me. And I've seen it my own kids where, you can see, they might be having a great season undefeated and they'll lose the grand final, but you could just see snippets of things they haven't addressed from a values point of view and a behaviour point of view, because there isn't a standard set and a foundation set. So there isn't an expectation of what you've got to behave. And you can see it, and you're probably the same, mate. You can see it coming, right? And you can see issues rising because that hasn't been established. So that's probably my thing for that. Really establishing that before you do anything. And that's what we do at the Kings. We really establish that early in our program of each year and reassess that. Where are we? Where do we need to work on? What are we going to? And when we have camps in April and things like that, we spend a whole day or afternoon of that. We get that down. It's less about on-field. It's about that. We embed that. That's what we have. And then when we have July camps, we're reassessing that. And no different if you've got a team each year, you just reassess. What do we need to change? What do we need to fix up? Right up. So yeah, that's my view on that. It's probably shared by others, but it may not be shared. But I think that's where people can improve, and you'll find performances will improve. And I had that discussion, mate, with Campese Mafu, when I had him talk about that and really developing connections and identity, and he rang me the next day. He goes, mate, unbelievable. I just enjoyed the weekend. Yeah, so
love it, mate.
It does work.
It does work, mate. And when you can shift your mindset from the X's and O's to the leadership and cultural sides, it's It's immeasurable, but it's enormous. Now, Stu, I'd like to just sign off today, mate, with just my 3 takeaways that I got from this awesome conversation with you. And they are these. Number one, this statement that every group is different. There's always a context. And the danger when you cut and paste from other teams, you miss what's really special about your group and you don't double down on that. So taking things from previous groups, regurgitating what you've known before is never the best practice. And I love the way you talked about finding sort of easy wins with your own culture. That's the history, that's vulnerable stories to bring people together under your context. And just to acknowledge that every group is different is a massive start for a good coaching practice. Number 2 is this statement that you talked about is what your environment looks like for someone when they leave your program, the values that you leave with people. And I really loved it because it makes you think longer term as a coach, not just the here and now, not just treating a player as a piece of meat, but knowing the importance of them, that they're part of a legacy, you're growing them as a person, not just as a player. And I think when you take that tone as a coach, your coaching will just be better all round. And number 3 is you talked about leadership groups are important for your feedback loops for you. Like the new age of coaching is not the old age. Leadership groups provide a sounding board. They give you feedback. And if you're prepared to relinquish a bit of the power, if we call it power, and concede when you need it, what you're going to get is this amazing collaboration effect. You're going to bring people in and it's going to be a combined effort towards the one target. And that is the way society's shifted. And if you want to a great culture, you need to shift yourself as a coach. And you shift and you'll find the culture shifts.
Yeah.
Stu Woodhouse, what an absolute pleasure to have you on the Coaching Culture podcast today.
Ben, thank you, mate. Loved it. Love every minute of it.